Hi, welcome to Jadekind Gaming. My name is Adam, here with a flip-through and review of Eberron, Rising from the Last War, Dungeons & Dragons setting, Wizards of the Coast. Taking a look here, and I will point out, cool dinosaur on the back. It's got the cog symbol, so if there is further Eberron books, they can all be identified by the spine. And Eberron is one of the few official settings that I've ever run anything in, even if it was just part of like a single session at the beginning of my Worlds Collide campaign. I did technically run an Eberron. And of course there is a special edition cover, but that one won't match all the spines on a bookshelf, so get the normal ones so they all match. And I am going through this, I'll leave it on the table of contents if you want, with the concept that I don't particularly plan to play in the setting. I mean, again, I've played one session in this, so it's possible, but that's not really my goal going into it. It's more what I can pull from the book for my own worlds. However, that being said, we begin with Welcome to Eberron. And they're introducing their setting, the history, languages, currency, calendar, the idea of, it's a pulp adventure setting, your intrigue, and sort of just little basis for how the game may be supposed to feel. They introduce it as a magical world, and things that can be bought and done. Communication, magical entertainment, medicine, travel services, all revolving around magic. And the last war, the idea behind the setting is it's recovering from a very long war, and society is still figuring out what's going on now after the fighting seems to have stopped. And then prophecy, and that's a good primer to kind of get what the world is. Then we get to Chapter 1, Character Creation, which has the races. And of course, all the races have little descriptions of here's what they're like in Eberron. But I'll be focusing on our new races, like Changelings. Changelings are shapeshifters. They can look like whatever people they want to look like. Get a bit of a charisma boost, some skills with like deception or persuasion or such, and their big feature there is they're actually changing shapes, looking like whatever race, they may want. Under elves, we do get a new weapon, a double-bladed scimitar, and a feat for elves that are specialized with it. We have goblinoids, which includes bugbears, goblins, and hobgoblins, which are all the same as they were presented in Volo's Guide. We have the Kalistar, which are their dream-based psychic people that have mind links and whatever. Advantage on wisdom saving throws and resistance to psychic damage. So we have them. We do get orcs, and orcs are different than they were in Volos. They don't have the negative to, was it intelligence? Whatever. The negative is just removed, and instead of just having intimidation, they get 2 of the following from a list of skills that could include intimidation amongst other things. So they are just better. And based on my own comparisons to some of the other races, more balanced. These, if someone wants to play an orc in my game, and I'm allowing that, this would be the one I would take over the one in Volo's Guide. This one is just plain better, but it seems more, in line with what I would expect from a race. So, yeah, we have that. We have shifters, shifters and changelings always used to confuse me up. Changelings are shapeshifters, Shifters aren't shapeshifters, they're lycanthrope people. Like light lycanthrope. Werewolves and such. They have dark vision, and they get shifting, which is for 1 minute, once per short rest. They get some temp HP and a little bonus feature, whether it be extra armor or a natural weapon or faster movement, whatever, some other little bonus that they get during that time. Each of the 4, Beast-Hide, Longtooth, Swift Stride, and Wild Hunt, get their own extra feature for shifting. They also have their own ability score increase selection, and they get skill proficiency. So, yeah. And then we have, of course, Warforged, which are our robot people. Which they would be one of the ones if ever you have a world and you want to have people that are constructs but are completely people, they have souls and such, they can do whatever, they can be druids, they can do whatever, they're people, even though they're constructed. That's, Warforged can be great for that. Their history, says, they were built for war in this world, but, just change the name up and you can use them in whatever world you're building. They get con and an ability of their choice. They get skill and tool proficiency of their choice. They get in addition to common, they get a language of their choice. They're customizable because they come in many different varieties. Otherwise, they have constructed resilience. They're constructed people. English is hard. Which is advantage on saving throws against being poisoned and resistance to poison damage. You don't need to eat, drink, or breathe. You are immune to disease. You don't need to sleep, and magic can't put you to sleep. They do have a Sentry's Rest, which is like a 6-hour version of like the Elven thing, the rest, but they don't actually sleep. They can see and hear as normal when they're doing it. So, yeah. And then they have integrated protection, which is the idea that they get +1 bonus to AC, to their armor, and then also with a complex way of getting armor on and off, it can't be removed from them against their will. And then also under the heading of races are Dragonmarks, which I'm not a big fan of them choosing to do it as race and subrace options, but that's what they did. And these are not something I would be likely to use in a game outside of Eberron. But the Dragonmarks are each under Dragonmark houses, which I think of as powerful noble families, basically. And so for each one, they describe the family, the house, what it does, its importance, its influence, and then whether it's a variant race for like humans or something, or a subrace, or whatever, they give the actual race stats. And each of them also has spells of the mark, which is to say, if you have spellcasting or pact magic, you get extra spells added to your list. So, you will, if you're the Mark of Healing, which is a halfling, and you're a wizard, you can get these spells as a wizard, which includes things like Cure Wounds and Healing Word, and thus, these healing magic can all of a sudden be something you have as a wizard if you have the Mark of Healing. So if you're this type of halfling. So yeah. It's, there's a handful of them. Otherwise, they're just race variants that are based on people with magic tattoos that naturally occur. There's also a feat for aberrant Dragonmarks, which is saying these naturally occurring sort of bad Dragonmarks that the houses don't like because they want to keep things under their control. In which case you get some extra abilities and a flaw. Not a big fan of that either. And then we get one background, which is the House Agent, which is to say, from one of those Dragonmarked houses, you come from one of the Dragonmarked houses, and you're tied to them. So, if you're playing in Eberron, cool. I'm not, whatever. However, the next page introduces the Artificer. first new full class in 5th edition since the Player's Handbook. And it's crafting and magic item focused. It has spellcasting, which is the same as the Paladin or Ranger progression, except that it starts at level 1. So basically level 1 is the same as level 2. You just get it 1 level earlier, and then it actually advances at the same rate, which is basically half. They do have the little section on multi-classing, so you can still multi-class with them. It gives you the rules for doing so here. They have magical tinkering and spellcasting, and they spellcast using either their actual tools or once they create their own magic items, they can use those magic items. So if you create a magic sword, you can use your magic sword to be your spellcasting, focus, which gives great versatility to them, once it opens up to that. So you have lots of options, and that's cool. And they kind of encourage you just to, have fun with the flavor. Figure out what your type of artificer is and try not to put you in a box, which I liked. There's the actual list of their spells. They have their infuse item, which is the idea of making a temporary magic item. They have their specialty, some crafting things. 10th level, you can attune to 4 magic items at a time, plus other thing. 14th is 5. 18th, you get 6 magic items at a time. Your capstone lets you get a +1 bonus to all saving throws per magic item you're currently attuned to, so basically +6 to all saving throws. Yeah, and they have other things amongst them, but definitely magic item focus is a big part of it. We have 3, artificial specialties, the archetypes. And who's to say if we ever, I guess maybe we may get more if they do another Eberron book, but outside of that, I don't imagine. They'll be in just the normal, expansion books. Yeah, we get Alchemist, which is the potion-focused one. They get some extra spells onto the list. They get, elixirs that they can make, and, potion-based healing kind of things. Whatever. Potion-based version. Artificer, which is based on having turrets, but the turret is allowed to be tiny-sized, and a tiny-sized turret can be held in a hand, so you can have your turret technically be a gun, so if you want the flavor of your Artificer to be that he uses a gun, you can, and that can be like a force projectile or a flamethrower, or it can be protection. And then those get better as they go. And then there's the third one is the Battlesmith, which is basically the combat focus, like the melee combatant, and you also get a Steel Defender, which is this good boy, or they can look different, but yeah, you have a companion that also gets better as it goes. And then it goes into your infusions, which is your actual magic items you create, whether it's the various, +1 armor class, or after level 10, +2, or whether it's a homunculus servant, which is creating a construct to help you, or whether it's replicating one of a big list of actual magic items from the Dungeon Master's Guide. You have options. You can make magic items. Then they go into group patrons, which is you can work for an Adventurers Guild, Crime Syndicate, Dragonmark House, Espionage Agency, Head of State, Immortal Being, Inquisitive Agency, Military Force, Newspaper, Religious Order, or University. For doing so, each one gets an example of Adventurers Guild, Clifftop Adventurers Guild. Here's information about the guild. Here, and then they also just go general. Here, if you are part of any Adventurers Guild, here are the kinds of benefits you get. Here are example types of adventurers or contracts, or basically adventurers and contacts. who you might meet, basically what allies you might be able to get by being part of this group, and then what kind of missions might you get sent on, because the idea is you're working for them, they're sending you places. So they have the different ones in here. I'm not a huge fan of it, but if you need a good way to get all of your players on board with following, with what kind of adventures they get to, go on, because working for immortal being might give different kinds of adventures than if they work for, say, a newspaper. Because the newspaper may send them to go get interviews and to investigate things. The immortal being may have them trying to break apart seals that are binding, different things in the world. So, different sorts of adventures, and this gives your players as a group some agency with what that will be. Then we go to Chapter 2, Corvair, Gazetteer, and they go into what the different nations of Corvair are. You get a map. More on that later. And each nation lists the capital, what it's known for, a description, interesting things about it, things that would be good for you to consider if you're making a character from that nation, what cities and sites are important there, and what the last war has done, like what the influence of the last war has been on that area. And so they go over all the different nations in their main continent. A lot of that, if you're playing in the world, great. It's a quick, page and a half of information on it, but yeah. Then distant lands, which are places outside of their main continent, in which case they give a description of the area, and possibly notable locations for it, and what its influence is on Khorvaire. So, how it influences the main continent for Eberron. And so you get that for a variety of different places. Then we go into the faiths of Khorvaire, so the different deities and religions, and, how, what their symbol is, their rites, the temples, all of that. For the different churches there. Then we get to Chapter 3, Sharn, City of Towers, which sort of goes into, first a guide of the city, talking about falling, because it's a very tall city, different spellcasting services, education, shopping, healing, holidays, sports, government, temples, guilds. And then we get into the different wards, which is to say the different areas. So there's different sections of the city on one level, and then there's different levels of the city, both up and down. Descriptions for how long it takes to get around, and just a bunch of charts for, in the Central Plateau, which is this little central area, what are some important districts, so the actual district areas in different locations. Upper Central, Middle Central, Lower Central, And they do that for the different areas, regions. Then they go into the different spots and go into specific noteworthy locations for a bunch of them, whether it's shops or, the Dragonmark houses area, whatever that might be. They go into some criminal activity and forces of law, whatever. They describe their city. Chapter 4 is Building Eberron Adventures, which goes into themes that you might have, like recurring villains, action, intrigue, and then it goes into a variety of different groups and cults and influential things that include maps for different locations of many of them, but just what are the different influencers that might affect the different campaigns, again, or like the last war, how its effect would be, again, if running in Eberron itself. A lot of stuff specifically for the world, which, I mean, like, the Mournland is the idea of this big, magically scarred area that was left behind by the war. And there are all sorts of different terrain features that are very unique to it. And you can pull things out of this. You can absolutely scavenge these different things for your own games, but it's a lot of just noodly, just read through and be like, oh, that part is interesting, let's throw away all this filler and grab that, you know. When creatures there have mutations, just environmental magic effects, even a little mini dungeon that is inside of a Colossus Warforged. So, yeah, just different things like that. If you're playing in Eberron, obviously, lots of cool things to help you with making adventures. Also, the planes, the different planar cosmology, which, in addition to it being its own unique cosmology, and they go later into how it's separated off from the rest of the D&D multiverse, or at least attempted to be, they also actually have manifest zones, which is the idea of when certain planes are near certain areas of the material plane, they orbit around it like planets around the sun, only a lot more chaotically, obviously. Then there are manifest zones, and things like in the Devani manifest zone feature, perhaps creatures can't tell deliberate lies while in the area. And just different features that might, you know, things that might happen due to planar influence. Information on celestials and fiends, different kinds of travel. Travel is a very big part, because this has a light steampunk or magic punk kind of feel. You get elemental vessels, which includes the airships, or a galleon, which is like a seagoing, magically propelled version of that. Obviously, that one came first, I guess. And the lightning rails, which is the idea of the trains that can go across. And like with some of those, where you might be traveling with other people, just a big chart with mysterious passengers who you might run into. They also have Gold Dragon Inns, which is the idea of a hotel chain, where you can reliably, you know, expect certain amenities and services from if you stay at a Gold Dragon Inn, because it's a chain of hotels. and then, because that chapter on Sharn before wasn't enough, you get adventures in Sharn. Life in the city, getting a home base, what kind of location that might be, and then what events might happen in Lower Sharn or Upper Sharn. You get a little bridge map here, the Skyway, in the Heights. Just things that might happen in different areas to seed an adventure in the city. So they're really making sure that you can do all sorts of options for building an adventure. First, in that city, they've really detailed, and then they've somewhat less detailed the rest of Corvair, and then less the rest of the world. So they're definitely helping you with if you wanted to build an adventure in this world, knowing what you need for it. They also go into crime with the different street gangs, and they discuss the different street gangs, and they give maps for some important locations for them. They also go into the Watch, and I did kind of like sort of the idea of, it might seem like a lot of the Watch is corrupted, because the Watch is watching out for the people of the city. And they'll have deals with like some of like the gangs where they're going to ignore, you know, a lot of the crimes they do, as long as they target outsiders and not people that actually live in the city. So, as a player character coming into the city, you'd be more likely to be targeted and less likely to get help from the law, because the law is worried about protecting their own citizens, not some strange adventurer that's wandering in for who knows what reason, etc. It's like, that was interesting. And yeah, but just details on the Watch itself. And then we get Forgotten Relics, which is a first level adventure that gets the party up to level 2. So there is a little mini adventure in there. Not a big fan of that, even less so than the setting, but I'm glad they kept it to one level, kept it short, sweet, enough to kind of give a feeling and get you going. And then we get to Chapter 5. Treasures. First they go into Dragon Shards, which are the magical power source within the world. And then we get to magic items, which varies from legendary Beholder Crown to common Arm Blade for a Warforged, or the Everbright Lantern, which is just basically a continual flame spell in a lantern. Different. You get focuses and orbs that help with different, say, when you cast spells, helping you do a little bit more damage. +1 to a damage of a fire spell if you have a Fenian Ash wand. So definitely kind of going from common items. I like the Cleansing Stone, which is just a way to keep keep people in the city clean. But also, a number of them have this symbiotic nature, which is the idea that they're from, what do they call it? It's one of their world things. The Dalkir. And so you end up with these items that give some benefits, but you can't remove them without, removing a curse. And, there can be some possible downsides. So they're basically cursed items, but that might be worth the curse. And then there's prosthetic limbs and things just for normal, common, whatever, everyday needs. There's also Eldritch Machines, which is, it says right here, ultimately, Eldritch Machines are plot devices that can represent the culmination of a villain's master plan or a last defense against evil. So they're magic item locations, like the Creation Forge, where Warforged were made, or dimensional seals that keep evils at bay, etc. And then they get some basic stuff, creating and buying common magic items. A cantrip spell scroll takes 8 hours and costs 15 gold to create. Yeah. And finally, Chapter 6, which goes into Friends and Foes, our Bestiary, and we get these. Stat blocks, basically. And we get some big, Challenge 22 and 24, some of the Dalkir, and some smaller, little dinosaurs. Clawfoot is basically the raptors that I grew up thinking what raptors were. They're the raptors from Jurassic Park. They're medium-sized, so they're like a person size, can be ridden by a halfling, as opposed to how small raptors actually are, but this is what we thought they were growing up due to Jurassic Park, so. We get some warped hobgoblins and goblins into these monstrous things, a new hag, we get some homunculi, some basically constructs, some possessed people, undead soldier. We get another big one in sort of a lich, like a named lich person. We get living spells. These were cool. These are definitely not the kind of thing that would be in every world, but I can see having some worlds or arcane laboratories where spells come to life. And they're constructs, but with not any made form. They're just spells that are self-persistent, that can cast themselves or otherwise do their type of damage as they just persistently move on. And there's a little quick reference to turn any spell up to 5th level. Particularly, it's going to be working, the evocation or conjuration, basically the damage-dealing spells is what you're going to use it for. But, any spell up to 5th level can be turned into one of these. But yeah, those were a cool new addition. The Load of Blades, which is like a named individual Warforged person. We have a named Rakasha. So we're getting some of like the specific people that might be basically, you could have a campaign that leads up to fighting one of these people. We get the overlords that are, trapped down in Khorvaire, which is basically their Underdark-ish kind of place. And so we get a couple of those. Again, big bads that your game could be working towards. We have dream spirits, a few different types that relate to the psychic race. We have radiant titles, which are fallen angels. We have basically a warrior version of the Rakshasa. We have the Undying, which are good undead elves. Elves of one of the cultures so revere their dead that they get to be undead, but they're good undead, not evil undead. Valinir animals are basically like spirit animals that come and, they can bond, they choose to bond to you kind of thing. And they can have some special traits. Those are pretty cool. Forged Colossus, which is the idea there was a dungeon, Forged Colossus dungeon you could crawl around in earlier. Well, this is the thing actually up and moving. And I get names like here are the ones that might exist. And it has things like stomping, like it can step on a 20-foot radius area. Warforged Titan, which are just large Warforged to fight. And then we get some generic NPCs from certain people from some of the cults to some of the races that we have get their own little stat blocks. Mage Rights is the idea of just challenge 0. These are people, normal, everyday people that use magic to do their job. Whether they're artisans, entertainers, mediums, healers, just they have some minor magic, they use some cantrips and some other magic as rituals, and they're just doing an everyday job kind of thing. And then we get assassins, and then the Warforged soldier, so we have one of that race. And then, it's right here, this book came with something else. And this I thought was particularly cool. Just that they just include this. Remember that little map that was inside there that I said we'll get back to? This is it. They gave us the continent of Corvair. So you got our scale marker, different area, so the different nations, many of the smaller interesting points are labeled on here. Where is it? We have the city of Sharn down here. In my, I said I did that one D&D game. It sort of started from in the Mordor Holds, going into Kibara. But yeah, so it is Corvair. And, not only that, but the back is Eberron. House Civis presents a true and accurate map of its seas and continents. So you get Corvair, you get the Elven Island, which they talk about as one of the other places. You get Zendrick, you get Everise, and whatever the northern pole is, obviously. You also have, I don't recognize either of those. I don't know if they even discussed them, but they're on the other side of the continent. It's just, yeah, you get the continent, or the continent and the world. And so, I felt like that was pretty cool that they included the map as well. Overall, definitely glad I got it. It's definitely the kind of book where because it is a setting, a lot of it's going to be used as piecemeal, pulling bits and pieces here. A lot of the races are not even as, they're not going to be things I'm as universally accepting in every one of my worlds, but they're flavorful. They definitely have a big impact, and they're definitely the kind of things that you can pull some of them for some worlds, and they give you cool ideas for things that might be in your world. The Artificer is cool, and I'll probably try and include it as much as possible. If a world has magic and magic items, and those are something that is common enough within the world that people can make them, then going with it. You know, it's like that's a great thing to just be able to include. The Bestiary at the end is relatively small, but it has the gambit from just very simple, small things, small threats, up to high-level campaign end things. And I'm even looking at it right now for possibly pulling some of the ability. I may not even pull the full creature, but just certain abilities from some of these guys, like some of their tendril whips from one of the aberrations, and I'm like, that's a cool thing that I could add to an aberration that my players are going to fight in the game I'm currently running. So there's things from that, and then also just magic items, and a lot of them are not necessarily things that are going to come up often. I mean, how often do the players actually need to attune to a magic item in order to have a prosthetic limb? Or do they need ventilating lungs? But they're cool, and we haven't gotten a lot of other magic items. I mean, other than the common items, that's relatively rare, so having a few pages more magic items is cool. And then most of it is just the setting, which is cool. Of the D&D settings, it is definitely one of the cooler D&D settings, and if ever I do a world hopping game, that would be my most likely time to actually use it. And the fact that I have a map of it definitely helps with that idea. I guess. So, Worlds Collide was mildly world hopping. It was just one way from a few different worlds, but it was the one that I used it in. I had a player that liked it, and I was like, right on, let me do some research, and we'll start you there, and it was fun to play in. I won't do a long-lasting game in someone else's world, because I don't know it that well, but it definitely does a lot where if you're willing to put in the effort to read it, and then build from the structure they gave, they've given you a lot to start with. Of course, I'll link down below where you can find Eberron Rising from the Last War online. You can pick it up. If you have it yourself, if there's any favorite races or options they have in there, if you liked the Dragonmarks being races, any of that kind of thing, just comment below. Let me know what you thought of the book. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Bye.